Today's daf is daf Chaf Aleph, and we're going to begin on daf Chaf Amud Sheni, the second parak. Okay, hold on. Let me get my pointer. Okay, so this parak is called Hayoshen, someone who sleeps. Till now we've discussed how to build a sukkah, and now we're going to be discussing the eating and the halachas of a sukkah. And I remember, I always think about when in Borough Park, there was especially when my grandmother lived, there was a lot of apartment buildings, and there were some people that were so concerned about eating and drinking and doing everything in the sukkah. And there was one sukkah in the courtyard for the entire apartment building, and you would have the wife lower down on a pulley a hot glass of tea for the old husband to bring it into the sukkah from the 6th floor. Just remembering that, always made a impression on me how serious they took it.
Yeah.
Right. The Mishnah begins the second parak, and it says like this: Hayoshen tachas hamita b'sukkah. Someone who sleeps under a bed in a sukkah. Now, when it means sleeping, obviously it means eating too. But sleeping was very common in those times, to sleep under a bed in a sukkah. So here's the picture. The picture goes. I'm sorry. Here is the picture. The guy is sleeping under a bed in a sukkah. So he has an interruption of the bed to the roof of the sukkah. So the Mishnah says you were not fulfilled your obligation of sleeping in a sukkah. Usually, lo yotzi de chavasa means you have to repeat it. So obviously, the Mishnah doesn't mean that you have to repeat sleeping. If you did it already, what could you do? But what it's trying to say is you didn't be mekayim the mitzvahs aseh of sleeping in the sukkah and living in the sukkah. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. We had our custom, shahiyinu yeshenim tachas hamita bifnei hazakenim. We would sleep under the bed in a sukkah in front of the elders, in front of the great gedolim. V'lei amru lanu davar, they didn't tell us anything. So it must be that sleeping underneath a sukkah is not a problem. And we'll see what is the basis of this argument, this machlokes. Amar Rab Shimon agrees with the Tana Kama that you're not allowed to sleep in a sukkah. You're not allowed to sleep under a bed in a sukkah. He says, Maasa b'Tavi avdoi shel Rabbi Gamliel. There's a story about Tavi, the servant of Rabbi Gamliel. Shahayoshin tachas hamita. He was sleeping under the bed in a sukkah. V'amar lehen Rabbi Gamliel lezakenim. And Rabbi Gamliel had a light conversation with the gedolim that were in his sukkah. And obviously it was, and the reason why Tavi slept under the bed in a sukkah, the reason why Tavi slept under the bed in a sukkah was because Tavi was a slave, and a slave is patur from the mitzvah. And yet he did not want to leave the sukkah because he was interested in the conversation between Rabbi Gamliel and the other great Talmidei Chachamim there. So Rabbi Gamliel said to the Zakenim, Re'isem, hi, Louis. We're in the Mishnah on the second parak that just began the Mishnah. Re'isem Tavi Avdi. Did you see Tavi, my servant? He's sleeping under a bed. Shu Talmud Chacham. He's a Talmud Chacham, means he's interested to learn things, and therefore he doesn't leave the sukkah. And he knows Shavadim Peturim min HaSukkah. He knows that slaves are not required to be in a sukkah and sleep in a sukkah. Therefore, Lefichach Yoshin Hu Tachas Hamida. Therefore, he slept under the bed to make place for the other people to be able to sleep in the sukkah proper and be yaitze the mitzvah. According to this method, we learned, just paying attention to this light conversation, if someone would sleep under a bed in a sukkah, again, he would not be yaitze. So again, if he sleeps like this under a bed in a sukkah, he's not yaitze. So the Gemara asks the obvious question: if the bed is very, like our beds, it's very, close off the ground, what kind of oil is there? I mean, there has to be an oil. There has to be a space to separate from the bed to the sukkah. So the Gemara asks, V'holeka asar, what is the problem of sleeping under a bed in a sukkah? There's no 10 tfachim. So if there's no 10 tvachim, there shouldn't be a problem sleeping under a bed in a sukkah. So Tirgum Shmuel, so Shmuel interpreted our Mishnah that our Mishnah is talking about bemita asara. There's a bed that it's 10 tvachim off the ground, 10 handbreadths off the ground, and therefore it's about 30 inches off the ground, and therefore that is an interruption between the person sleeping and the roof of the sukkah, and that's why if you do that, you're not yotze the mitzvah of sleeping in the sukkah. Gemara begins. The Gemara begins like often the Gemara segues to another place, and then comes back to sukkah. So this is what we segue off to a Mishnah in Ohelos. Again, Ohelos means that if you have a dead body or dead kazayas from a mace, and it's underneath the same tent of another human, so even though the human didn't touch the dead, the corpse or the kazayas from the mace, he would become tamei just the fact that he's in the same tent, in the same room. So the Mishnah says over there, Echad chur shecharuhu mayim. Here's the picture. You have a hole right over here. You can see it right over here. The water made like a oihel over here. The carved out rock. And so if you have a mace over here and another human being over here, that's called a good oil, even though it's no human made that oil. It was made by itself. Or the next case will be, I'll show you the picture, is that Shrotzim, dug out an area which now has a roof over it. So it wasn't man-made. So the Mishnah says, if the water carved it out, a hole that a water carved it out, or shrotzim, or insects, or the salt ate up the ground and created an oil. A group of stones, or a group of boards. So let's see that picture. Here's the salt ate up the ground. So the salt, so to speak, created in the hole in the ground to create an oil. Or you have stones that just landed this way, let's say after an avalanche, and landed this way, and now you have a tent. You have a tefach over here. Or the wood fell down somewhere and they just landed in this method, and it now created an oil. So all these things, the Bryce is going to say, ma'il ala tuma. It's a good oil for tumas hameis. That's a complete good oil, even though the human didn't make it. Rabbi Yehuda says, kol oil she'eino osui b'dei adam eino oil. Any tent that was not man-made is not considered an oil, and that's not considered a tent. And therefore, by the way, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if a tumas hameis is in that location, it would go straight up. It wouldn't spread over the whole area underneath the roof, but it actually would go straight up because it's a tent. It's a tent that was not made man-made. It's not considered an oil. So the Gemara asks, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, what is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? We go to Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Why do you need to be a tent to be man-made? So the Gemara says, Yalef oil. He learns the word oil mimishkan. Where it says tent by tumas hameis, and it says the word tent by the creation of the Mishkan. Ksiv Hoch, it says by tumas hameis, Zoi Satorah, this is the law, Adam, a human being, ki yamus, that dies, ba'oyel, in a tent. So kol asher ba'oyel, yitma shivas yamin. Anything that's underneath in the same room, in the same tent as this dead body is tamik. So that the word oil. Uksiv Hasam, it says by the oil in the Mishkan, by Yifrois, and he spread as oil, the covering, al hamishkan, on the tabernacle. So we see that it was humans who created this oil. So we see that in order to have the oil hameis, it has to be humans that make it. So just like over there by the Mishkan, a human made it. So also by the tumas hameis, it has to be an oil that was made by humans. So the Gemara says v'rabbanan. What do Rabbanan do with this Gezeirah Shava? And it seems that an oil has to be made man-made. Oil riba. It says many times the word oil in Parshas Chukas, and every time it says oil, many times one of them is going to include even tents that were not man-made. Now, so therefore, there's machlokes between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. If a non-made, an oil that was made bidei shemayim, is that considered a tent? So the Gemara says, V'sava Rabbi Yehuda. Does Rabbi Yehuda indeed hold? Kol oil she'eno asui b'dei odom eno oil. Any tent that was not man-made is not an oil. Is that true? Does he hold like that? Uraminu, and I'll ask you a contradiction against Rabbi Yehuda. Chatzeris. Now, what's this talking about? We're talking about over here in para. We know, and here the Gemara is going to say a fantastic situation that incurred during the second Beis Hamikdash. Fascinating. It almost seems like a Waco, lahavdal. But what it is we know that the Kohen Gadol that does the para aduma had to be sequestered, just like the Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippur, 7 days. Each of the 7 days, they sprinkled him with paraduma waters to try to purify him from tumas hameis. So they made an extra stringency that the Kohen Gadol for that's being purified to create a paraduma had to be purified with paraduma ashes, and the water that was used to mix those ashes that they're going to sprinkle on the Kohen Gadol had to be drawn in such a way that you're guaranteed it was impossible for that water to become tamei. Now, again, ashes have to be mixed with water, and that paraduma ashes has to be sprinkled on the Kohen Gadol that's going to lead the service in creating a new paraduma. Now, why did they do such crazy things as we've encountered this before? Why did they do such crazy chumras, stringencies to create a paraduma? Because right before the Kohen Gadol does the service of the paraduma, we touch him with a tumah and tell him to go to the mikvah, so that he is a tvul yoim, a person who went to the mikvah, not completely tohar, because we want to make him tamei in a semi way on his way to become pure. Because the tzedukim were saying that a paraduma has to be made by somebody totally pure. So Chazal went and was matama the Kohen Gadol in order to take everybody not to think like the tzedukim. And because they did this leniency of being matama the Kohen Gadol, they did special strictness in order leading up to the Kohen Gadol doing the service. So listen to this. Chatzeres hoya benuyes b'Yerushalayim al gabei sela. This is the picture. They made special villages on top of a bedrock over here, which was carved out over here. So therefore, this is the most purest village that you possibly have, because even if there was a tamei mace underneath, right, a tamei, a dead person or somebody buried in the ground, there's a hefsek tefach in between. Okay, there was a oil in between. So therefore, the tumah never went from the floor to the village. So that from the initial bedrock. I think Rashi has an opinion that it was like this Roman type of aqueduct where they created little oils to protect the upper floor. But be that as it may, that's what they did. And what did they do with this village? The Tachteim Cholol, there was underneath a space, because there might be a dead body over there. So we wanted to make sure that there's like on an airplane, that you have a space so that the tumah never reaches the airplane, because there's an oil separating that. And what did they do with that village? They would bring pregnant women to give birth over there, right? And so the women would give birth over there, so the baby was born in that location. And they would raise their children so that they could help with the service of the paraduma. So the kid was grown up over there till he was 7 or 8 years old. That's where he lived, in that little village over there. Now, this was done throughout the second bias, because we never know when you're going to need a Kohen Gadol to create a paraduma. They never knew when they're going to have a paraduma. So they always had these villages for women who probably volunteered to give birth over there, and actually, give it like a kibbutz. So you have the kid grow up over there. Now, when he was up until he was 7 or 8, so he never became tamei in his life. He never could see Kerry or anything like that. Then, when the time came, they would bring oxen, and on top of them, they were doors, like wooden doors. Take a look. So here's this boy on a wooden cow, so to speak, and he would be drawing this water to use to mix with the ashes that's going to be eventually sprinkled on the Kohen Gadol. So that was let's read it inside. They would bring oxen and there were doors. The tinoikis would sit on top of those oxen so that they don't stick their hands out. The koises shall even be dayim, and they would have a stone of cups of stone in their hands. They reached the Shiluach springs. There, the Yagul B'Seichamayim. According to the Tanna Kama, they got off the horse, they got off the cow, and they went into the water, and they filled up. And they sat back onto the door, back onto the cow. Rabbi Yossi, I meant no. Even when they got to the water well, they stood in their place and they would lower a bucket and bring it up to the cow. Again, what you see over here is the reason why they have this board on top of the cow is because that is like an oil. So in case you pass over a dead kever hatahoim, maybe there was somebody buried there, it's always never reaches the boy because he is on top of that. So there's a protection over there. And so that, now, the Tanya we learned in the Braisa. Rabbi Yehuda, they didn't even need a door. They brought specially wide cows. So Rabbi Yehuda says they brought this type of cow right over here, a very wide cow. So even the body of the cow was an automatic oil to protect the kid on top. That was Rabbi Kiva. So that's what he says. So this is where you can see right away the contradiction. Rabbi Yehuda v'hashvarim. You just told me that Rabbi Yehuda holds that only if it was man-made, then you have an oil. If it's Hashem made it, if a man didn't make the oil, it's not called an oil. So then v'hashvarim, but aksim, the oil she'ena also b'dei adamu. It's not meant, it was not created by human beings, right? It was created by Shemayim. And Rabbi Yehuda agrees that is a good oil. Rabbi Yehuda, they didn't bring doors, they bought cows. They didn't even have to have a board on top of a cow. A white cow was very good. So how could Rabbi Yehuda hold? How could Rabbi Yehuda hold that the cow is an oil when Rabbi Yehuda holds oil that's not made by man is not called an oil? So the Gemara answers, Ki asa Rabdimi Amar Ablaza. When Rabdimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he learned in Israel and came back to Bavel. Omar, he said in the name of his teacher, Rabbi Elazar, Moide Rabbi Yehuda would agree, Kimloi Egroiv. Rabbi Yehuda would agree that when did Rabbi Yehuda say that an oil that was made min hashamayim is not an oil, only if it's a tefach, only if it's about 3 inches. But Rabbi Yehuda would agree that even something that was not man-made, if it's a little bigger than a tefach, like kamloi egroif, like the size of a fist, right? The size of a fist is, the way we're reading it is about a tefach and a third of a tefach, a little bit more than a tefach. Even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that is a big shear, that even if it was non-man-made, it's considered to be an oil. So back to the picture over here. Since this is many fist breaths, we'll call it, from the ground to the top of the stomach, to the bottom of the stomach of the cow. Therefore, even if it was non-man-made, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that is considered to be an oil. So said the Gemara, Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned in a Braisa, Rabbi Yehuda would agree, Bashkifim over the Kiki Hasloim. Even if you have a case like this, that rocks that dislodge themselves from a right over here, dislodge themselves from a place, that's called shkifim. Onekike means there's a crack that they couldn't fill it in. So if it's very big, right, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it's called an oil, even though it's not man-made. Since it's very large, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that it's called an oil. So now the Gemara asks the question. Rabbi Yehuda did not like that they brought a door. Rabbi Yehuda said they didn't use a door. The kid just sat on a very wide cow. The question is, why not? Vaharei delis, a door, the eshba kama egroifim, uktani Rabbi Yehuda lo yemavin delosus elishvarim. Rabbi Yehuda says that they didn't bring doors, they brought only cows. Why couldn't they simply take a very narrow cow and put a door on it? Why didn't Rabbi Yehuda like that idea? from the top of the door to the ground where the cow is walking is definitely many egroifim. It's many fist breaths, and yet Rabbi Yehuda says that's not a good idea. Amar Abaye, so Abaye explained, not that Rabbi Yehuda said it's not a good idea. He says, you didn't have to bring doors. Probably it was dangerous. The door could tip. So bring a very wide cow. That was Rabbi Yehuda saying. He says you didn't have to bring doors, albeit it could be good, but you could bring a very wide cow, and that's sufficient. Rava gives another answer. Not that Rabbi Yehuda did not want you to bring doors. The loss is called ikar. They didn't use doors at all. Why? Very interesting psychology over here. Rabbi Yehuda totally disagrees with this idea of having a board on top of a cow, and he's balancing himself on top of the cow. Rabbi Yehuda totally disagreed with this idea. Why? Because a young child has a large ego, and he thinks that he's very balanced, and we are afraid during that trip to get to the spring, Shema Yoitzi Roishi, he's going to stick his head out beyond the door, or Echad Me'evarav, or one of his feet, or one of his limbs, or he's going to stick his hand out, to show off. V'yitame, and he's going to become tame. We go to Chafala from Ucheni. Bekerev Hatahoim, he was going to become tame because there's a dead body. There might be a dead body buried there. So in order to prevent him from sticking his hand out and being so cocky, so to speak, and sure of himself, we had him ride on a wide cow, and that really put him in his place, so he would never stick his hand out. He was just holding on to the bucket. Tanya Kavasi the Rava, we have a brisa according to Rava. Rabbi Yehuda says, Loi Hai Mevin, the loss is called Ikar. They didn't bring any doors at all. Because he has a large ego. Maybe he's going to stick his head out and he's going to become tame with kever time. So what was Rabbi Yehuda's idea? They would bring shvarim hamitzvah, Egyptian oxen, and these Egyptian oxen is a certain breed that makes them very, very wide. Shekeresehem rechavos. Their bellies are very wide. The the children would sit on it. The koises shall even be them. They would have stone vessels in their hands. They reached the Shiloach spring. Yardu, they dismounted. Umilim, they filled up their water. Va'alu, and they got back up. The Yashvu lehen al gabe, and sat on their backs. So that explains. So we just got through explaining Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda agrees that an oil that's not man-made, could be considered an oil. It's only if it's just a tefach, then it's not an oil. But if it's larger than a tefach, it doesn't matter. It's always going to be a tefach. Now the Gemara is going to, so Rabbi Yehuda holds that things could become an oil. So the Gemara asks this question, Baharimita, the bed, sleeping under a bed in a sukkah. The yesh ba kama agroifim. There's definitely many fist breaths from the bottom of the bed to the floor, right? When you sleep underneath the bed. Utnan. Rabbi Yehuda says it's no problem sleeping under the bed. Rabbi Yehuda we would sleep under the bed in front of the zakenim. So why would Rabbi Yehuda allow such a thing? Why would Rabbi Yehuda allow sleeping under a bed in a sukkah? Why would he allow this? The bed interrupts you from the roof of the sukkah. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, Sha'ani mita, bed is different. This is not called an oil. Hoil ulgaba asuya. Since it's made to sleep on top of the bed, not underneath the bed, that underneath the bed cannot be called an oil. So the Gemara says, hold it. Shvarim nami legaba anasiyim. The ox is meant to be ridden on its back. So how could you call underneath the ox from the stomach to the floor an oil? No one uses underneath the ox as an oil, as a tent, as a protection. So the Gemara says, no. Ki also Ravin, Amar Ablaza, Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael. He said in the name of Ablaza, Sha'ani Shvarim Hoyel Umeginim Alaroyim Bechamab Nechama B'Kshamab Neakshamim, that the shepherds actually would sleep underneath these white animals to protect them in the sun from the sun and from the rain. So actually, it was used as an oil, as a tent, living quarters for shepherds. So underneath this, that's why the oxen, underneath the oxen from the stomach to the floor can be considered an oil. So the Gemara says, if so, mitanami, a bed underneath, you don't really put anything, you're not supposed to put anything under the bed, but you could put your shoes and sandals. People used underneath the bed. It's not totally not used. It could be used for shoes and sandals. And as Rashi explained, Talmidei Chachamim use it for shoes and sandals, but nothing more, because you're not supposed to put food and other things, item underneath your bed. But at the end of the day, you do put things underneath your bed. And therefore, why isn't underneath the bed called an oil? You actually do use it as an oil. Rava said like this: really, a bed is not called an oil, even though you put your shoes there, because at the end of the day, it's not, you're not living there. You're just putting some items there, but that's not called an oil. But underneath the belly of an ox is called an oil. Why? Because the Torah calls it an oil. The Tanakh calls it an oil. Shani shvarim hoil va'asin lahagen al bnei mayim sholehem. The spine of the ox protects against the inside, the intestines of the ox. Shenema, the pasuk says regarding the inner organs of the body, or ubasar talbisheni, God put skin and flesh, right? We all have skin and flesh. Uvatzomais, and with bones, vigidim and sinus, to seichechenu, use that as a cover that covers the inside of the inner organs of your body. So your heart, your liver, all your intestines are all covered by the outside of your body, and it's called tzchach. So that's why on the ox, the back of the ox is considered to be like the back of the ox over here, of the cow, is considered an oil because it protects the insides of the body, the insides of the inner organs of the body, and therefore underneath the cow, that's considered to be an oil. But underneath the bed is not considered an oil because people don't live there, and all you do is putting shoes there. That's the first teretz of the Gemara. The teretz of the Gemara, the other teretz of the Gemara is if you want, I can give you another answer. Rabbi Yehuda goes according to his reasoning. The Omar, he says, the reason why sleeping under a bed is not a problem because sikas diras keva be'inim. The real sukkah is like supposed to be your main. It's supposed to be built as if you're going to live there a long time. And mita diras arai. But the bed is always considered, even underneath the bed, is a place where you live there temporarily because you're always moving the bed around. So the sukkah oil keva, and the sukkah is considered to be a set permanent dwelling place, right? Also oil arai mavatul oil keva. The oil arai of the bed, the temporary tent of the bed cannot nullify the permanent structure of the sukkah. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda says you could sleep under the bed in the sukkah. What's the problem? There's no problem over here. This is only a temporary oil. The sukkah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, had to be built permanently, as a permanent structure, as he said in the first Mishnah that it could be built 80 feet high, 20 amas. So 40 feet high. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds that this tent cannot be an obstruction for the sukkah. So the Gemara asks, okay, then how do you understand Rab Shimon? Rab Shimon, the Omanami Sikas Dirs Kevabin. Rab Shimon agreed with Rabbi Yehuda somewhat, and he held that a sukkah needs 4 walls because he also held that sukkah, as we learned in the first parak, is a permanent structure. And he holds that you're not allowed to sleep underneath the sukkah. And that's why the Tavi, the servant, slept under a sukkah. But also oil, arayim abatal oil keva. And Rab Shimon said the temporary tent of the bed nullified, it was an obstruction for the sukkah, which is a permanent dwelling place. So how do you work that out? So the Gemara says, that's exactly the argument. Marsavi, the Rab Shimon holds also oil arai, the temporary dwelling, umavata oil keva could nullify the permanent dwelling. So that's what Rab Shimon holds. That's why you are not allowed to sleep in a sukkah. Umar Saba, loy also arai umavata oil keva. And Yehuda says, no, you could sleep in a sukkah because a temporary dwelling of underneath the bed will not nullify the permanent dwelling of the sukkah. So to make it very clear, there are 3 opinions in the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts off and says, Hayoshan tachas a sukkah, you're not allowed to sleep underneath the sukkah, right? You're not allowed to sleep under the bed in a sukkah. Why? The Tanna Kama holds a sukkah is a diras arai, and the bed is a diras arai, so they're an obstruction for each other. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the sukkah is a permanent dwelling, and the bed is a temporary dwelling. The temporary dwelling cannot be an obstruction to the permanent dwelling. Rab Shimon agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that the sukkah is a permanent dwelling and the bed is a temporary dwelling, but he holds one step further, that a temporary dwelling could be an obstruction to a permanent dwelling. So that's the three opinions in the Mishnah, but two of them hold you can't sleep in a sukkah.
So today we would not be able to have a separation like that because most of the sukkahs are temporary.
Oh yeah, we always hold the Mishnah. I remember, like in Daf Zayin, we had just a bunch of Tanoim who held
right for Keva.
To Keva. So Rabbi Yehuda was one of them. Rabbi Shimon said you have to have 4 walls. He didn't agree to the 3 walls.
Yep.
But most of the paskin that it's diras arai. Nevertheless, you still can't sleep under the bed because the oil arai of the bed is considered an obstruction to the sukkah.
Right.
Amar Rab Shimon, we'll just finish to the Mishnah. Amar Rab Shimon, Maisi b'Tavi Avi. Tanya, we learned in a brayso. Amar Rab Shimon made a comment, and this is a lesson. Misichason shel Rabban Gamliel, from the light conversation of Rabban Gamliel that he talked about his servant, and sicha. Rashi says loshan sichas chulin. It would seem not holy words. The simcha. And Rashi adds the words that it's happy words, a light conversation that's in a happy tone. From those words of a Talmud Chacham, you could learn Shnei Devarim, 2 things. First of all, we learned Sha'avodim Peturim in a sukkah. You learn that slaves are patur from a sukkah, because I would have thought that a slave should sleep in a sukkah, just like maybe you should have your wife sleep in a sukkah, because it says Teishru Kein Tadiru. You live in a sukkah like you live in a house. So just like you live in a house with your domestic help or your wife, so maybe you should live with in the sukkah. They would also have a chiyuv to be in the sukkah. So we know that they're not, because it's mitzvahs asay shezman garma. So that's the first thing you learned from the conversation of Rabbi Gamliel. The other thing we learned, v'lamanu shayashin tachas amita, if you sleep under a bed in a sukkah, liyatzadei chavase. You're not yotze the mitzvah. So v'leima, why didn't we say midvarav shel Rabban Gamliel, from his words? Why did he say from Misichason Shara, from the light conversation? Maybe from the teachings of Rabban Gamliel. So the answer is, Rab Shimon was saying a very important point. Milsa agav urchei kamashmalan, a lesson along the way he was trying to teach you. Kiha, the Amar Rav Acha bar Ravadi, he was teaching the following lesson. But Amrillah, others say Amar Rav Acha bar Ada, Amar Rav Hamnuna, Amar Rav. All this was says. Menayin, how would I know? Shafila sichas talmidei chachamim. Even the light conversation of a Talmud Chacham, you have to study, because a Talmud Chacham, when he's talking, is not wasting his words. Even in his light conversations, he's trying to teach you something. Shnema, the first pasuk in Tehillim, the leaves of someone who's Taurus Hashem Chefzai, even the leaves, which you would think are the not important part of a tree, lo yibol, doesn't wilt away. In other words, that even that needs to be studied as well. And that works the other way as well, that when a Talmud Chacham speaks, he's learning before he speaks, because he's measured in his words. So that's why a person just shouldn't think that just coming to the lecture, you learn a lot, but even just casual conversations with the Talmud Chacham, you could learn a lot in halacha and in Musar. Okay, we'll stop over here by the Mishnah. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Yeah.